What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Fantasy NBA Tonight, live with myself, Vince Miracle, and my new co-host. I said forget about Aaron Brewski. This guy was hurting my feelings, talking about how he's going to beat me in all of these fantasy leagues and things like that. I said, you know what? No, forget this. I'm bringing the cousin of DeMarcus Cousins. Buddy, Jake, what's going on?
Happy to be here, Vince. I would never claim to beat you in fantasy or anything.
See, I appreciate that, and I also appreciate that you are the cousin of DeMarcus Cousins. I had that correct, right?
That is actually very true. He and I are very close, grew up near each other.
All right, guys. So for those who don't know what this show is where we answer all of your fantasy basketball questions. And all you have to do to get your question here on the show is leave it here on the live chat, which I'll be monitoring very closely. And just so you know, our very first people that have ever come to this show, that have never heard of it before, this is a Hoop Dash Ball presentation of all these questions here will be soon. This show will soon be a late night show for all of our premium subscribers. For right now, before we get into the season, we're doing a league passing, a preseason, if you will, with myself and all of the fantasy experts here on Fantasy NBA Tonight. For the last week, we had all of myself and Aaron Brewski, and now we're letting you guys get to meet some of the other writers that you haven't got to meet yet, like Jake Cousins. So, Jake, before we start answering these questions and we have all of our viewers start coming in, hit that thumbs up button so that we know that you guys are liking this show. Let the people kind of know a little bit about who you are. How long have you been with Hoopball, and what's some of the fantasy knowledge that you've been bringing to this draft guide?
Cool. Yeah, I started with Hoopball right at the end of last season. Did a lot of breakdowns of teams over the off season, kind of postmortems to see what happened. And then for the draft guide, I did a couple team previews and then a lot of focusing on I wrote our dynasty ranks, I wrote our dynasty strategy, and then spent some time looking at ADP over the last couple of weeks and trying to break down where some market inefficiencies are. So doing a little bit of everything, but a lot of focus on the younger guys this off season.
Awesome. Well, I don't want to delay it any further because I do think that we're going to start getting our questions in here quite a bit. Again, this show is going to be for 1 hour, and we're taking all of your fantasy basketball questions, no matter the size of your league, no matter what type of league you're in. Jake and I are here and ready to answer all of your fantasy basketball questions, and all you have to do is put those questions here in the live chat. I'm monitoring them very closely, and we'll answer them live here on the show. But wait for our viewership to start coming up a little bit, and we wait for these questions to start piling in. What has your thoughts been on the preseason? Who has been that player that's kind of been standing out for you a little bit and that's been kind of rising up your draft rankings?
Yeah, preseason's tough because you just there's so many different variables. You don't want to overreact. So I tend to be pretty cautious in the preseason. But one guy that stood out that just finished playing tonight is Rudy Gobert. I know Derek Favors is out, so some of his counting stats might be a bit inflated, but I think after tonight, his field goal percentage in the preseason is up to 78%, which is good 28% better than he managed in any season so far. So, small sample size. Don't want to get too crazy, but if that dude can start hitting his free throws even 70% of the time, that's a game changer, and he deserves to be drafted a lot higher than he's going right now.
Yeah, the one thing about Gobert that I'm really worried about is those legs and that injury that he sustained. I mean, he looked a step slower last year going into the final part of the season there. He just doesn't look the same Gobert that he was 2 years ago. Now, this preseason, he has been balling. I think he is starting to climb back up the ranks a little bit for a lot of fantasy owners. What do you think he should be able to bring in terms of value for fantasy owners this year? Because, I mean, they did kind of get if they chose him and they had him on their team. So how high are you moving him up, and how high are you trusting him this year after a preseason like this?
It's a great point. I think we all got a little too excited about him last offseason, right? And he was going, I did drafts where he went, 10, 12, 13 overall, which was probably a bit overly optimistic to start with. And now I feel like if he's right, and you're right to point out that so much of his game is predicated on his athleticism. He's not the most, technically skilled post player or anything. But if he's healthy, I think the hate's kind of swung too far the other way. And now you see him dropping, fifth, sixth round a lot of the time. But I'm comfortable kicking him with my my third or fourth pick if the makeup of my team makes sense and it's right. I'm not trusting the free throws yet. That if I'm trying to be competitive in that category, I'm not taking him as just as a neutral in that. I have to account for his poor free throw shooting in the past. But yeah, I like him in the 4th round.
All right, guys, this is Fantasy NBA Tonight Live with Vincent Miracle and my co-host for today, Jake Cousins. We are here and we are ready to answer all of your fantasy basketball questions. And all you have to do to get your question here on the show is place them here in the live chat. I'm monitoring it very closely. We're going to answer them live here on the show. Also, guys, we are taking all of your questions during the middle of the day. So I do want to let you guys know that if you want to go and subscribe to our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter, I'm at VM Center. Jake, what's your Twitter handle?
At Abyss Also Gazes.
As you can see, he was not a huge fan of Twitter when it first came out by that name. Or you can tweet at HoopballTweets and let us know all of your fantasy basketball questions during the day. And maybe some of your questions will be answered on Fantasy NBA today, but most of your questions will fall into Fantasy NBA Tonight Live with myself and whoever my co-host may be. It might be Jake on Mondays, or it could also be Aaron Brewski later on this week, who you guys will see. So a question here that came in here on the live chat: concern over Victor Oladipo. Do you see him in the top 20 this year?
That's where his ADP is kind of starting to climb, right? It started this offseason. You could get him 30, 32 maybe, and it snuck up to the top 20. It's a risky pick, and you have to know that going in, and you have to hopefully have some reliable assets on your team when you pick him. But I actually do kind of like him that high. I gamble a lot in fantasy leagues, not literally, but I'm willing to take risks in fantasy leagues. But I think we're talking about a guy who can easily average 25 and 5 with elite steals. And if he can get those 3-pointers above, 1.5 a game, I think he's worth that pick in the late teens.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm ready to go top 20. And I could understand why a lot of people say that. I mean, seeing what happened in Orlando, I believe he brought in 4th round value last season. I'm remembering off the top of my head. I can look that back in just a few minutes. But he did that with Orlando and Scott Skiles, who did not want to play him. So I understand why people are like, okay, he's now in OKC. Durant is gone. They need a second leading scorer. And that's 100% true. But I just don't know if it's going to be top 20 value. Maybe that 3rd round, maybe top 40, maybe somewhere in that range where I can believe. I want to have that wiggle room. I don't want to reach and then he becomes an undervalued player for me, or he doesn't live up to the expectation of a top 20 player, and I'm picking him in the 2nd round of my draft. I just don't think I'm ready for something like that with a guy like Victor Oladipo. Do I think he has the potential to get up there this season? Of course, I think he has the potential to get there, but at the same time, wiggle room. I want to have the growth of him being able to get to that ADP. I don't want to have to reach just to get him there. So that's my thoughts on Victor Oladipo.
I think
as we move on to the next question.
Oh, I was just to follow up on Oladipo.
Go ahead.
I think you're right that the concern is that you price out any value and that he has to basically live up to your loftiest expectations. I believe though over his last 82 starts, he was a top 10 overall player. Obviously there's some mental gymnastics and extrapolating like that, but I don't think he has to take much of a step forward. He just has to not have Scott Skiles benching him for large chunks of games.
One of our active watchers here, Tamakar, he said, I just had our drafting. Now I got a bunch of questions. So Tama, I see you in the chat board. I'm ready for all those questions. But our next question comes from Higgins Rocks. Higgins, you rock. Thoughts on point guards available later in draft? Schroeder, D'Angelo, Avery Bradley. Highest floor, highest ceiling. Jake, I'll throw that over to you.
Yeah, I think of those 3 names you mentioned, I think highest ceiling definitely has to go to D'Angelo Russell. First year into Luke Walton, I think he has a lot of potential there. But lowest floor, Schroeder kind of scares me. A lot of people are really high on him. I get it. The natural skills are there, but he's been so inconsistent in the moments where Jeff Teague's been out that could break badly in a hurry.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think Avery Bradley has the highest floor to where you know exactly what you're going to get. He's going to be a defensive guy. He wants to be Defensive Player of the Year. And something that we've been seeing over this preseason that's really been intriguing me is that he's handling the ball a lot more in the pick and roll. especially with Al Horford. And then he's also doing a lot of pop. So he's getting the screen off of Horford, rolling off of it, faking as if he's going to pass, or he just stops for a second and then hits that mid-range jumper. And it's looking like it's becoming an effective play for Boston. But, of course, highest ceiling has to be D'Angelo Russell. And it's not just because of the hype that's coming out of this preseason. Have literally no offensive option except for a run-down need Luol Deng, who already got injured this preseason.
Mm-hmm.
Jose Calderon, who got worked against the Sacramento Kings' Aaron Aflalo, and now he somehow has a hamstring injury. I mean, Jordan Clarkson is up there as a viable option, Julius Randle, but that's the youth movement that's happening right now in Los Angeles. So you look at D'Angelo Russell, he's going to have the ball in his hands. He's going to be the guy initiating the offense, and most times I believe he's going to be the guy finishing the offense. So I'm going to say D'Angelo Russell has the highest ceiling, and I think that's an obvious answer, but I think a bigger question out of this is Dennis Schroeder. What kind of season are you expecting from a guy like him? I know you said your expectations are a little wobbly. I know a lot of people are high on him. I agree with you. I'm not that high on him. I think he's going to have a Reggie Jackson type of year where you're going to expect that he gets all of these things. There's a lot of hype around him, but live up to it. So what round are you possibly trying to look to snag a guy like Dennis Schroeder?
I mean, the more drafts I do, I'm getting the impression that Schroeder's not going to be on my team this year because there are too many guys I like in the kind of late 6th, early 7th. And that's where he seems to be going. I think a round or two after that, fine. But I like your Reggie Jackson comparison a lot because while Jackson puts up, some solid numbers in the points and assist category, he's really lacking in a lot of the things that make or break fantasy teams. Especially when it comes to threes and steals. And I'm worried about that sort of impact with Schroeder as well. So yeah, if I can get him in the 8th or 9th round, great, but I'm not seeing him fall that far.
Yeah, I have him as a 9th round value for me. I want him in that 9th, maybe a little bit further, but I know he's not going to fall that far. Unfortunately, he just has so much hype around him right now that I think a lot of people are reaching for him and getting him in the 7th round. And I just feel like that's people reaching a little bit, but that's just my thoughts. We want to hear from you guys. What are your guys' thoughts on Dennis Schroeder? Go ahead and start leaving your guys' comments in the comment section below, as well as leaving your guys' questions that we will be answering here on the show of Fantasy NBA Tonight Live with myself, Vince Miracle, and my co-host for Mondays, DeMarcus Cousins' cousin, my cousins in
best friend too.
Best friends. Goodness gracious. You got to let me meet him. I'm out here in Sacramento and he doesn't want to talk to me for some reason. Next question here is best end of bench guard. Drop MCW for Ish Smith or Seth Curry. Anyone else that might not have been drafted in 10-team leagues?
It's a good question. I think if you're looking for a short-term solution, Ish Smith is fine. I'm not thrilled about MCW this year. So I think if you're looking to upgrade and you can be patient, I like Seth Curry of that crew for his ability to hit from deep and the fact that just Dallas's other options are so injury prone.
I like Seth Curry. I think Seth Curry is going to be a guy that's going to have a role with the Dallas Mavericks, but you brought up MCW. I don't like MCW in Milwaukee. I actually like Matthew Dellavedova though. As an end-of-the-bench type of guy, he can get you some steals. He's going to get you those three-pointers. He's going to have that same exact role that he had in Cleveland, but with guys with Jabari Parker and Giannis Antetokounmpo. So in a 10-team league, that may be a guy that you look at and you say, okay, Dellavedova, you know what you're going to get. You can possibly get 5 assists from him on any given night. He can get you probably a three-pointer or two, as well as get you a possible steal. You just never know how many times he might do an illegal defense and might get kicked out of a game, but he never normally gets called for it, so it's all good there. Another guy that I want to bring up also in the deeper leagues, Schroeder a little bit earlier. There's no backup really there. Jarrett Jack is still battling injury right now, but Malcolm Delaney has been balling out this preseason. He has a lot of experience because of the Euro League. If you're in a deeper league, I wouldn't say a 10-team type of league. I think you can wait and do the wait and watch approach for him. But a Malcolm Delaney in a deep league, I think that's someone you want to definitely keep your eye on for an end-of-a-bench guy. As we move on to the next question here, it says, this one's from Andy. It says, how do you rate my top 5 picks? So we're giving him a rating system here. How do you rate my top 5 picks in a 10-team head-to-head 9-cat? Pick was Karl Anthony Towns, Anthony Davis, Kemba Walker, and Jay Crowder. His top 5 picks in a 10. That was his first 5 picks. I'm gonna say A plus. That's an amazing first 5 picks. What about you, Jake?
Yeah, you could have stopped after you said Anthony Davis. Just getting Cat and then Davis in the second round already makes it an A plus, even if you'd blown the next 3.
Then Kemba Walker.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. Matching that up with another defensive big in Gorgui Dieng and Jay Crowder. Yeah. I applaud you, sir. That's a great snag in a 10 team. That's an awesome league. That's an awesome team. So let's see here. It goes. Also drafted in a 9-cat 12 team. He wants us to rate this one as well. I guess It's the same guy. So also drafted in a 9-cat 12 team. He has CP3, Draymond Green, Isaiah Thomas, Gorgui Dieng, and Miles Turner. Feeling pretty good with both teams. Hesitant on a guy like Draymond Green. I do like Isaiah Thomas with CP3. I think that's a good matchup. Gorgui Dieng, I think, is still going to have a really good year now that he's the undefined starter. He's going in there with starters minutes. Tom Thibodeau is going to definitely be playing him. No one's in front of him. Miles Turner, he's in for a breakout year for sure, but Draymond Green is where I have my question mark. But at the same time, season was not a fluke. But Klay Thompson can rebound. Zaza Pachulia can rebound. And a lot of the offense is going to be a lot of motion with Steph and Klay and Kevin. So how many touches did Draymond Green see? I don't know what to expect from him this year for being a second-round pick. I've kind of floated away from him a lot in my drafts and letting somebody else try and take on that risk. But other than that, yeah, I think that's a solid 9-cat 12 team league. What about you?
Yeah, I think that there's so much to like there. I guess the one reason that I would be a little bit more bullish on Green in this specific situation, in general, the amount of unknowns around the Warriors makes me a little gun shy too. But you really aren't looking to him for too much offensive production when you got Isaiah Thomas with your 3rd pick, starting with CP. And I think Miles Turner is going to contribute a lot on the offensive end too. So if you're looking at Draymond Green as just the uber defensive specialist to kind of round out that lineup, I think it works.
All right, guys, we are taking all of your fantasy basketball questions here on Fantasy NBA tonight, live with myself, Vince Miracle, and my main man on Mondays now, Jake Cousins. I want to remind everyone that this is a Hoop Dash Ball presentation. If you guys can do us a huge favor, hit that thumbs up button so we know that you guys like this video. And if you guys want to watch more videos, hit that subscribe button so that you will constantly get every update that we have when we're going live. And you can also see past shows. Also, guys, we're taking all of your questions during the day. So if it's on Twitter, you can hit me up at VM Center or the site hoopball.com at hoopballtweets. And Jake, what's that Twitter handle one more time?
So you can make fun of it again. It's at Abyss Also Gazes.
At Abyss Also Gazes. You guys can find that as well. And when the show wraps up, I'll try and find a way to put it down in the description area so you guys can just click on that over there. But you guys can submit your questions all day long, and it'll either land on Fantasy NBA Tonight or on Fantasy NBA Today. Just start submitting those questions with hashtag Fantasy NBA Pod. And we actually got a question online earlier today. I'm going to take the time to let the chat start filling up with more questions to go and bring out the question from earlier today. And it's from Jason. And what he asked earlier today is that he's in a 10-team 8-cat head-to-head league. We are all newbies. I found an old article suggesting I should draft point guards and power forward categories. Any thoughts? So what the question really entailed for it to go, but I mean, I'm guessing that is a 10-team 8-cat league. He's starting in the middle of his draft. Should he start just point guards and power forwards through the early rounds? And I'm going to let you go ahead and answer that first, Jake.
It's funny. I think that was the first fantasy basketball article I ever read too when I was getting started. I think the premise, don't get hung up on positions, right? It's not about drafting point guards for point guard's sake or power forwards for power forward's sake. The point is look for players that give you a diverse array of stats and that complement each other. At the time that article was written, it was catchy to clump those groups into point guards and power forwards, but you're looking for as many players as you can that contribute across the board, and then be aware of where your team's strengths and weaknesses are, and draft supplemental players or base your subsequent decisions based on what you already have.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you something that's been said on the show countless times this past week, and that is best player available through the early rounds of your draft. And to be set all the way through. I mean, maybe you want to take up some variation going into that 4th and 5th round, but you want to take the best player available. It doesn't matter if it's a power forward, doesn't matter if it's a shooting guard, doesn't matter if it's a point guard. If the best player available at, let's say, number 10 is a guy like DeMarcus Cousins or an Anthony Davis, that's that guy. But at the same time, if it's also Chris Paul, you want to take him. I'm making bad examples because those are both point guards and power forwards in that position. But you want to go after that guy because that's who is there. Maybe then you move into that second round and you fall into a part or into the part of the draft where you're seeing comes into play or another center comes into play after you drafted center in the first round. It does not matter. You draft the best player available, and then you start building your team about whatever your strategic idea is for your team. I mean, my favorite thing to go for is finding guys with steals, assists, and blocks, things that you can't really find that much at the end of your draft. That's my policy when I go into a lot of these drafts, but you always want to draft the best player available through those first 4 rounds. Want to add on to that? Should we move on to the next question?
I mean, just to put a point on it, right? You don't want to become obsessed with point guards and power forwards and pass on any of the elite small forwards that are going to go in the first 2 rounds, right? So I'm with you.
All right, guys, as we move on to the next question here, and it says, I need to trade for a small forward. Best small forward I got in the draft is Evan Turner. Ugh. Any recommendations looking at Jay Crowder, Evan Turner, and even Kent Bazemore? I think you said you drafted Evan Turner, so I'm going to just punt that and just say Jay Crowder, Trevor Ariza, and even Kent Bazemore. I would have said Trevor Ariza is definitely a guy you want to target if you're going to try and find a way to manipulate a trade somewhere and construct something. But out of those guys, Ariza, Crowder, and Bazemore, who of the 3 do you think that Tama should target?
Yeah, I mean, in a vacuum, I think I like Crowder the best of those 3, but Ariza is probably going to come significantly cheaper in a trade. I don't think that his name value right now really matches what he brings, and I think he's a guy you can go after and get a nice boost in steals in threes and even some boards.
And name value wise, Jay Crowder may be a little bit harder to get, but Evan Turner this year in that D'Antoni system is the perfect fit for what they need. He's going to be shooting a ton of 3-pointers. He's arguably the team's best defender, so you know he's going to get you at least a steal and a half a game. He's a decent rebounder. He's going to need to see time on the floor, regardless whether it's at the 3 spot or the 4 spot. They're going to be running and gunning in Houston, so he may be like Jake said, you may be able to get him for a little bit cheaper than Jay Crowder, and that's another reason why I do like him a lot, because he is arguably the team's best defender, so they have to keep him on the floor. Plus, he fits that Mike D'Antoni system very well. Now, move on to the next question, and it says, number 1, Harden or Westbrook, and why?
I don't think I can answer this question objectively. Like, I am too desperately in love with Russell Westbrook to actually take a step back. No, I think as much as I love Westy, I think efficiency does worry me. He's going to come out ahead of Harden in a lot of the counting stats, especially boards and assists, but I think Harden's going to shoot better from the floor. He's obviously going to hit more threes. You mentioned D'Antoni's system and him running the point. It's hard for me to get away from Harden with that first overall pick, but it hurts me to do it.
Know what type of league you're in. I'm not going to answer that without saying it depends on what type of league you're in.
You just tee me up to give the
Yep. Nope, can't do it. I wanted to see what you're going to say. I mean, if I had to put maybe I'd go Harden right now off the top of my head, just depending on what type of league you're in. I mean, the 3-pointers is going to be there. He doesn't shoot terribly from the field. He doesn't get you as many steals as Westbrook, but he's going to fill up the categories just as much as anybody else. And Harden, just because the 3-pointers become so valuable later on in the year and having someone who knocks down a ton of 3-pointers in the game, and there's a good chance he averages 20 for Houston. So I'm going to say it depends on the league that you're in, but if you're asking me, I'm going to probably go with James Harden, the fear of the beard in this bad boy. All right, so we move on to our next question here, and it says, to Harden, would you guys definitely punt field goal percentage for a guy like Harden?
I mean, I don't think he's an automatic punt guy, but shooting at that volume, you have to be ready to make that adjustment, right? You have to be considering that when you go into your draft. Obviously, if you're pairing Harden in the next round with someone who offers you a significant boost in your percentages, it's not off the table. He's not an automatic punt guy, but he's kind of on that edge for me.
I mean, if I remember off the top of my head here, this stuff up, and you guys can correct me anytime you want to at VM Center on Twitter. He shot 45% from the field, which is not terrible. So how many shots that he takes in a game, and if field goal percentage isn't one of those things that I like to punt in any category. If I'm punting any stat, it's normally going to be free throw percentage because it opens the door to get you guys centers like Andre Drummond. Rudy Gobert is not the greatest free throw shooter. You can look at a guy like him and DeAndre Jordan, the other centers that can not hit the free throw, but can help you in other stats. So I normally don't like punting field goal percentage. If I'm punting a category, it's normally free throw percentage or turnovers. But I don't necessarily think that just because you drafted Harden, you definitely have to punt field goal percentage. I think you can build a team around him, like getting a guy like Marc Gasol who's going to counteract whatever that is, or DeAndre Jordan. Again, if you're going to punt any category, I would recommend you punt a free throw percentage, because then guys who do have high field goal percentage, like a DeAndre Jordan, like a Rudy Gobert, like a Andre, they would start punting in other free throws, and they also get you blocks and rebounds, so it helps in multiple different categories. So that would be my thoughts on drafting field goal percentage, but I hope that answers your question. If not, leave another question down below, and we'll answer it here live on the show. On here, it is from your site has a decent amount of hype on Willie Cauley-Stein, but also an assumption that he'd get 27 minutes per game. How is the story developing? Koufos still bullish on Willie Cauley-Stein as a late round flyer. Jake, I'll let that go over to you because I have my own thoughts, being that I'm in Sacramento. I cover this team a little bit, so I'll let you answer that question first.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think you and Brewski have a bit more insight into the Kings, a lot more insight into the Kings than I do. I'm not as bullish on Cauley-Stein as the site consensus might be. What I will say, though, is even if he doesn't average the 27 minutes a game that we haven't projected for, say it's only 21, he's still such an elite defensive contributor, or has the potential to be such an elite defensive contributor, that he can make up for a lot without getting a ton of time on the floor. So even if it's not as aggressive a jump as our site is projecting, I still think there's a lot of value in where Willie Cauley-Stein's going right now.
So Willie Cauley is going starters minutes 100%. He's going to be the starter. I don't think that's even really in question. Kosta Koufos is starting right now, and rightfully so. I mean, he actually has played with Coach Dave Joerger in his days in Memphis, so he knows the system a bit more. But if you guys watch the preseason and you see how it's been developing a little bit, that second unit needs offensive weapons, and right now that's not Willie Cauley-Stein. Willie Cauley-Stein's not going to be a guy that is an offensive weapon for this team. What he's going to do is going to get an offensive rebound or a defensive rebound, be able to run down the floor because he is very quick off of his feet and get a slam dunk or get a putback. Another thing that you're seeing with Willie Cauley-Stein is it takes him a little bit to develop into something that to become. When he went from John Calipari's system into the NBA with George Karl's system, they basically were the same exact thing. They were a run and gun, rim runner teams, or rim runner for his and for what he can do and block the basketball and then just throw it up to him and let him dunk it. And this system, it's a little bit different. They're running the high post offense. They're looking for him to be a little bit better of a passer, set stronger screens, and for a guy who's a little bit skinny on size, he's not necessarily right away, but you've seen the last two games against the Los Angeles Lakers, double digits in points. He's actually looking a little bit more comfortable in the system. So I don't think it's actually that bullish of a thing to say, hey, he's going to get 27 minutes per game. He's going to be able to get, double-digit boards and close to double-digit points, as well as getting a block. I don't think that's out of question for a guy like Willie Cauley-Stein. Also, I think you also have to take into account that Rudy Gay potentially could be traded this season for the Sacramento Kings. Whether that be good or bad for his value is completely up to you, for you to determine. But want to package him in a deal, a great contract to package him up with would be a guy like Willie Cauley, or would be a guy like Kosta Koufos. To give Willie Cauley-Stein is someone that the team has been speaking very highly on right now during the preseason, during training camp. So what I'll say is that I think that it's not as bullish as you think it is with his minutes. And I don't think the preseason has changed it as much, but yeah, I think we'll stay steady with what Willie Cauley-Stein and what our projections are in our draft guide. And speaking of the draft guide, guys, I'll pause the show right here to give another shout out to this show. This is Fantasy NBA Tonight Live with Vince Miracle and my co-host every Monday now, Jake Cousins, also the cousin of DeMarcus Cousins. It's a joke, guys. That's not real. I hope you guys know that. This show is a Hoop Dash Ball presentation. What we have on Hoop Ball right now is our draft guide, and that's on sale right now for $17.99. You guys can go on hoop-ball.com and subscribe to that service. That's you're drafting the best team when your drafts come along. Also, there's different types of subscriptions that you can have, like our premium service, where you can actually get to ask experts like Jay Cousins, like Aaron Bruski, like myself, and a lot of our other writers, where they will actually answer your questions between 4 hours, or if you want the extreme package, 1 hour, and that's completely up to you to see. So go on Hoop Ball right now and look at all those pricings for more. We're back into the live chat so we can answer more of your guys' fantasy basketball questions. Remember, if you guys have a question, no matter the size or type of league you're in, Jake and I are here ready to answer all of your questions. And the next question is, what do competitive leagues do for vetoing trades? In a league with veto-friendly league, where almost no trades go through? So, Jake, I'll throw that over to you. So for all the competitive leagues that you guys are in, how do you guys determine if a trade is good? How do you go through? How do you guys veto trades?
I mean, I'm pretty extreme in the veto department. I just think trading is a skill set in fantasy, right? It's something that is part of the game, and to use veto as a competitive way to combat trades is sort of disingenuous or not really in the spirit of the rules for me. I think if there isn't obvious collusion involved, then trade should go through. People get to manage teams the way that they want. I remember what I thought was a steal of a trade a couple of years ago for Wes Matthews that ended in disaster when he blew out his Achilles, right? And all of a sudden that owner had made a smarter move for their team in the long run. So I'm a big believer in letting trades ride unless there's some sort of cheating going on.
I mean, for me in my leagues, I like to look at the teams from both sides. I believe in one of my leagues, it's 5 vetoes, depending on the size. I believe like 5 vetoes, 6 vetoes has to be the amount before the trade actually gets not able to go through. But I look at the trade at both sides. Like you said, I want to make sure that there's no collusion happening. I mean, you look at one roster, is he really winning that end of the deal? And how is that other team gonna sway into why they would make that trade? Like, what benefits does both sides see? Because that's what a trade is. A trade is something that benefits both sides in some way. So I definitely look at that. I mean, as for, what some leagues do more than others, I mean, one league where no matter what a trade goes through, unless a commissioner vetoes it and people have to email the commissioner, the most sets that I've seen is that you get that veto button and you get to choose whether or not you get to veto it. Sometimes you get lucky and you can, pull off a trade that is a little bit of what they call trade rape. Then you can hurt somebody in there, but that means your league isn't really paying attention. So I would just say that when you're looking at the trade, you want to look at both sides of it. And from all the leagues that I've been in, it's normally been half the league, I think, has to veto it. Because, I mean, a trade is definitely, like you said, a skill set, and it takes time into making that trade. Unless there's something where it's complete, one is colluding with somebody else and they're just trying to go halves on whatever it is that they're doing, then I think a commissioner has the right to go do something like that. But again, in most of my leagues, it's been half the league or a quarter league has to veto it. So we move on to the next question here, and thank you guys so much for all of your questions. I appreciate how active this chat is being, and I appreciate all the questions that you guys have been sending through. So keep sending in those questions. I'm monitoring it very closely here. As we now move on to the next one, it says head-to-head 9-cat, Millsap, Horford, or Jokic. Jake, I'll throw it over to you.
I'm a Nuggets fan, so take this with a grain of salt. There's a lot of risk with Jokic, and I think you have to be aware of that going in, but I'm going to roll the dice with him. I think especially in a 9-cat league, to get that kind of out of positional assists along with potentially half a three or a three a game to go with a block and a steal. I think the upside's real. And I think the extent to which you're seeing Nurkic and Jokic play together this preseason just hints at how much run he's going to get this year. So I think if you're swinging through for the fences, there's nothing wrong with going with the young gun.
I'm throwing Millsap off of it. I've stamped him with somebody else's headache this season. I mean I mean, for those who don't know what that is, that's Fantasy NBA Today. That's Dan Besbris and myself. We have a soundboard now, and we go, and then we say someone else's headache. That means we are not touching him this year. And it's not that he reduce what he normally does, which is second round value, early to mid second round value, which is fine. What scares me though is the knees and the fact that he is aging. So I don't know. And he had a knee procedure already this offseason. And will that, linger into the regular season? We don't really know. But I mean, he's already been battling injuries throughout his career, and especially in his time in Atlanta. So that day, I'm fading away in drafts. And again, I'm going to stomp him with someone else's headache. The three that you've mentioned, Horford is intriguing me a lot because of what's happening in Boston right now. Horford, addition to that team, they've been needing a big man, and they finally got one, and they're going to use him to the best of his abilities. But I'm going to roll with Jokic, and I'm not a Denver fan. I think Jokic has the potential to be something huge this year. I think this could be a breakout year for Jokic. What he did in the Olympics, how he's able to put his back to the basket, score from the three-point range. He can get you the assists. He's efficient both from the field and from the free throw line. I mean, this guy is a talented kid, and he's going to be a future of the NBA and a future of that Nuggets team. So I'm going to slightly roll with Jokic out of those three, but Horford's right on his tail. I really like what I've been seeing from Horford in Boston. Move on to the next question here. It says, what are your thoughts on Nurkic this season? Breakout or bust? And Jake, you're a Denver Nuggets fan. What are your thoughts on Nurkic?
You got to be worried about his injury history. It's been a rough ride, but he's lost some weight and he looks phenomenal in the preseason. Based on what metric you're looking at, you can argue he's outplayed Jokic. And while I'm not taking Nurkic anywhere near that high, you don't have to. I think the Nuggets are looking at moving on from Kenneth Faried one way or the other. And I think there's a real chance that they experiment all season long playing Nurkic next to Jokic. And if that happens, you're going to see starters level minutes from him. And the dude is a bear. He can get buckets in the post, and he can block 2 shots a game without question if he gets the time. So I think, gambling as you start turning to the later rounds of your draft, Nurkic is a good bet.
Let me ask you this, being that you closely follow the Denver Nuggets, that's your team. That's the team that you follow. You love that team. You'll see a Jokic and Nurkic pairing on the floor. What are your projected minutes there?
If you look at the preseason and you look at how they closed out last season, there's significant overlap. And if they could see, 10, 12 minutes together on the floor, you're getting into some real playing time for Nurkic that we weren't seeing when he wasn't healthy. I still worry that Jokic doesn't have the lateral quickness to hang with fours, but for this season anyway, I think the Nuggets are invested in seeing if it's at all possible that these two studs can play together rather than have to trade away someone that they see as a piece of their future in Nurkic. So I think they're going to share the floor a lot, and I think it's going to be to the benefit of Nurkic.
Last question here before I give my thoughts on Nurkic. Hey, is there any chance that Faried starts biting into his minutes to where, Nurkic maybe is more of a late round flyer right now until a move is made to where he is guaranteed more minutes?
I don't think so. Faried didn't actually have very high minutes last year under Malone, and even under Shaw, who sung his praises. He didn't see, I think, over 25 or 26 minutes a game at any point. I'll look that up, but I think the Nuggets know what they have in Faried, and I think he's a fine rotation player, but he's not something special. I think if there's any whiff that the Nurkic-Jokic pairing can work, Faried's not really going to be part of the equation. And Mike Malone has enough buy-in from the organization that if he decides to have Kenneth ride the bench, even if he's not thrilled with the situation, I think he has the support to do that.
So my thoughts on Nurkic before we move on to the next question is I still consider him a late round flyer. I like what I've been seeing from the preseason, but you brought it up. The injury history is something that worries me. The fact that he was in Malone's doghouse last season for a little bit of the year worries me a little bit about what him through their roster and how many minutes that he's going to be getting. Can it go up and down? Plus, a guy like Wilson Chandler and Danilo Gallinari, they've been talking about moving them to the 4 spot and playing a lot of small ball this year. And they keep talking about this really small ball lineup that I'm very intrigued about when we're going to see that. But I mean, as a late round flyer, this guy has the potential to put up numbers when he's given the minutes. He can rebound. He's just as skilled as Jokic is, and he's just a bigger body. So I would still consider him a late round flyer at this point, but I do like what he can be if he is given consistent minutes throughout the season. All right, guys, as we move on to the next question here, it says, Sacramento, what do you expect of Darren Collison this year, Vince? If the answer is not much, should I trade him for Crowder, Ariza, or Gallinari? I know he asked me, Jake, but what are your thoughts on Darren Collison this season?
Maybe this is just a hangover from, all I've seen of pun not intended, of Ty Lawson recently, but I actually think Collison's going to be fine once he comes back from suspension. I think that's his team. I think the excitement a couple of weeks ago when it's not his team compared to DeMarcus, but it's his position, right? And I think the hype on Ty Lawson kind of running away with that job was always overstated, and we're seeing that in the preseason and with Lawson already in trouble with the Kings organization. So I like Collison quite a bit, and I think when you compare him to a guy like Gallinari, who has so many red flags when it comes to his injury history, I think I'd rather have a guy like Collison. I know what I'm getting, and I think it's a pretty safe commodity once he returns.
I think Darren Collison's a guy that you can expect, right around 16 points and maybe 5 assists. I mean, I don't think it's that out of question to see him, have a very productive year as the team starter, especially in a contract year. So would you try and trade for him using him for Crowder or Ariza or Gallinari? I mean, I will consider trading him for a guy like Trevor Ariza. I think he's going to have a good year. If you're stacked in point guards and you're willing to move one, I think Darren Collison's a good offer for a guy like Trevor Ariza. I think they're both going to be able to put up numbers this year, and I think Trevor Ariza has the upside more than Collison, even though Collison will be the starting point guard for the team and can fill up more assists than Trevor Ariza. But you'll get the threes, you'll get the defensive stats. So I think if you're looking at one of those guys to get a small forward, I would consider trading Darren Collison for him. Move on to the next question here. It says, projections for Blake Griffin this year. Thoughts on my top 5 of Westbrook, Whiteside, Griffin, K. Love, and CJ McCollum. Also grab Devin Booker, Rodney Hood, Ryan Anderson, and Evan Fournier. So let's start off with the initial question here, Jake. What are your projections for Blake Griffin this year?
I mean, we'll get to where he was taken in this specific scenario, but in general, I'm bearish on Griffin. I think the injuries have cropped up every single year. And he doesn't give you enough in some of those money categories in terms of defensive production, in terms of threes. And he's below average in terms of field goal percentage. Yes, he has some real upside in terms of assists, but I feel like Blake Griffin's name always outstrips his fantasy production.
I'm high on Blake Griffin in reality. I think there's still stats that a lot of people say, okay, he can get me like rounds, 3 assists, and maybe like 22 points. But I mean, sometimes his field goal percentage is never really there. His free throw percentage is like a roller coaster, always going up and down. The turnovers are there. He doesn't get you much defensively, so he's more of just an offensive threat, kind of like what Kevin Love is, just with the added assists. So I'm not as high on Blake Griffin as a fantasy player, but as a reality player, I do think he's the future for that team. If we're going to look at what you did for those first 5 picks of Whiteside, Griffin, Kevin Love, and CJ McCollum, And then you also, you got some shooters in there with Devin Booker, Rodney Hood, and Evan Fournier, as well as Ryan Anderson. What are your thoughts on his team as a whole? I think he just wants to kind of get our opinion on his team.
I love the late round guys. I think you got a lot of value there with Fournier and Booker so late. Love Westy and Whiteside as a pairing in the first 2 rounds. I know I just said, well, I would liked to wait a round or 2 on Blake Griffin, but when you start with those 2, you're in pretty good shape. And I think the hate's gone a little too far on Kevin Love this year. I think everyone's still hoping, or still holding it against him that he's not, the guy we saw in Minnesota, but the 16 points and 2 threes and 8 boards that he's going to get with above average assists is nothing to sneeze at as your 4th round pick.
I love your middle round guys. Rodney Hood is one of my favorite players on Utah right now with Gordon Hayward out. He may be seeing an increase in minutes, and he has the ability to knock down threes as also as a good drive and kick guy, and possibly getting the assist from guys like George Hill, who shot right around 40% last year from 3-point range. So I really like getting him. Devin Booker, people are expecting a breakout year from him, and having guys like Brandon Knight and Eric Bledsoe there, I think you may see him play some 3 this year with those guys. So I don't think from him just because the team is healthy is going to happen. So I definitely like Devin Booker. Ryan Anderson, he's going to be a 3-point monster this year as well, possibly getting you 8 rebounds and a couple points, or 20 points, 18 points. I don't think that's crazy out of the question. I think you're looking at another Kevin Love on your team with a guy like Ryan Anderson in that system. So I like your team as a whole. I don't see much defense, but if you're in a points league that actively is looking for 3-pointers and things like that, I'm gonna say you got a B+ team. I like your team. I'm gonna say B+ though. It's on the A for me. On here to the next question. It says, do you see Sullinger? That over to you.
It cut out on my end, Vince. Sorry. Can you repeat the question?
Oh yeah. Do you see Jared Sullinger as being overly productive this year for Toronto?
Not particularly. I mean, as a guy that's slipped into the later rounds, I think that's fine. But we were just talking about Blake Griffin as a popcorn stats guy. But if you look at Sullinger, he's just such a drain on your field goal percentage from the power forward spot. He'll be above average in steals maybe, but his blocks are so low, and I just don't see him adding much to the rest of that rotation in Toronto.
I mean, he's been one of those guys where he's been a starter double, but in an inefficient way, and now he's expected to be a potential starter or be a good strong backup center. And yeah, he lost right around like 40 to 60 pounds, which is strong, but I want to see something out of him. So I would consider him a late round flyer for sure in standard leagues. But if he can get his efficiency numbers up, I mean, he's a guy who can get you the rebounds and even give you the occasional 3 from the big man position. So I definitely want to see more from him. I'm not as high on Jared Sullinger as others might be. So I'm going to hit the pause button and probably fade on him in drafts, but I can definitely see people taking him as a late round flyer. As we move on to the next question here, it says Rookie of the Year predictions. We've had this question come up quite a few times here on the show, but Jake, this is your first time on it. So who is your favorite to win Rookie of the Year now that Ben Simmons is out for at least until 2017?
I mean, that's the
season. That's just until the calendar year comes around and it's
right.
2017.
With Simmons out, I really like to turn to his teammate Joel Embiid. I think Ingram's going to do well out in Los Angeles, but as we talked about earlier, I think that's going to be the D'Angelo Russell show, and I think Ingram's a couple years away from really flashing his NBA talent. The back-to-back issue is going to be frustrating if they follow through with that. There's rumblings now they won't for Embiid, but other than that, he's looked like a monster in the preseason. Obviously, we just have to cross our fingers that the feet don't flare up again, but as long as that guy's on the floor, I think he's got the inside track.
I actually am going to go with a different Philadelphia teammate, and I think that's Dario Saric. I think Dario is going to be able to put up big numbers for that Philadelphia team, and he's showing signs of what he can be and also signs of being a rookie stepping into the NBA. I know that a lot of people are going to say, oh, well, he has all that experience in Europe, so coming over, the transition should be a little bit easier. And maybe so, but that means he's going to have an easy walk to Rookie of the Year then, because this is his rookie season. I think Joel Embiid is right now. There's a question mark on if he's going to be playing in back-to-back sets throughout the season that he just recently did against Detroit, where he went to go block a shot that was the reason why he would need to go block it, but he almost rolled his ankle and stopped, and the breasts were held until they saw him stand back up. So I don't know if there could be a case where Joel Embiid could be, monitored very closely around with his minutes throughout the season. I don't know. I don't think we'll ever see him exceed 25 minutes a game very much throughout the regular season. So I'm going to go with Dario Saric. I think Dario Saric is the favorite right. So as we now move on to the next question, again, if you guys have a fantasy question, get your questions in now. We have right around, I would say, 10 minutes left on the show to get your guys' questions in. So if you have a question, leave them in the live chat. And here on Fantasy NBA Night Live with Mondays, my new co-host Jake Cousins on the Monday show, and myself answering all of your fantasy basketball questions. So we move on to the next one here. And also, guys, Thunder Dan is in the chat room. That's Dan Vespers from Fantasy NBA Today. Give him grief in there. Talk to him. Let him know how you guys are feeling on this Monday. But the next question is, Depot as a second-round pick, and why would you take him over Kyrie or Kyle Lowry? 9-cat head-to-head. And, I think maybe they'd be getting into the Brewski 150 a little bit. And we touched on Oladipo earlier in the show, but to kind of rehash some of that conversation, what are your thoughts on Oladipo one more time?
Yeah, like I said earlier, I do like him as a second-round pick. I totally acknowledge the risk, but if you look at his last 82 games as a starter, he was a top 10 asset, and he finished that way down the stretch. You don't have Scott Skiles messing with his minutes anymore. I think 25-5 with great steals and a shot at almost 2 threes is on the table for him. In reference to those other two guys, Irving's knee injury and injury history in general continues to worry me. I know there's not a ton of things connecting all of his injuries, but it still scares me quite a bit. And the way that Lowry has faded over the last couple of years, started strong and then kind of fallen apart down the stretch, worries me. I think, unfortunately, he might be a guy that I want someone else to take a gamble on, because I don't want to deal with the potential crater when it comes.
Like I said earlier in the show, I like Victor Oladipo. I think he has being a top 20 guy. I mean, with a guy like Kyrie Irving, they're already talking about monitoring the minutes of the big three, especially with the knee injuries. They don't want to overdo him. They're looking to redo their championship. They're looking to win a second consecutive championship in Cleveland. So being that the regular season is not that important until you make it into the playoffs, that's what they're worried about. So that they're already monitoring LeBron. That means they're definitely going to be looking at monitoring Kevin Love and Kyrie Irving. So they're definitely going to be there for Kyrie. I understand why people will go with a guy like Victor Oladipo over him, because he's going to be playing for OKC, being that second leading scorer. And OKC is not a guarantee, especially in the Western Conference, of making the playoffs with teams like Phoenix, Minnesota, Houston are this offseason. Well, Houston, not so much. I don't think they're actually that much better. But those teams are expected to be better this year. And so being in the playoffs making the playoffs is going to be a lot harder in the Western Conference, where you look at the Eastern Conference and the Cleveland Cavaliers. It's safe to say they're head and shoulders better than every team that's out there. I think Boston and Toronto are definitely giving them a push for their money, but I think it's still head and shoulders better from what we've seen in the Eastern Conference. Now, a guy like Kyle Lowry, there's things about his injury history that worries me a little, that would see him sitting down a couple of games. Also, towards the end of the season, once they've claimed their spot, and depending how far your league goes into for playoffs, sit games out, and they're going to rest their guys throughout the season. We saw Dwayne Casey do it last year. I don't think it's safe. I think it's a safe assumption to say that they're most likely going to do that again. Oladipo definitely has the potential to be a 25-5 guy, like Jake said, and has the potential to give you those steals because he's going to be unleashed. There's no Scott Skiles holding him back and putting him on the bench and playing guys like Evan Fournier over him, in which I didn't understand why. So they moved on from him. He's now going to be looked at as possibly that second option for OKC. I think Enes Kanter is making an argument to why he should be. But, I mean, he's going to have the ball in his hands, so that's why you take guys over him, because you know he's going to be getting the minutes, you know he's going to be getting the touches, and even with those restraints last year, he was, I believe, a top 40 player when it was all said and done. So that's why people are high on Victor Oladipo, and that's why you take him over guys like Kyrie Irving and Kyle Lowry. Add on to that, or are we ready to move on to the next question?
No, I think you covered it, man.
All right, so we move on to the next question here, and it says, before I miss one, thoughts on Alex Len this year.
I mean, it's interesting. He's shown flashes this preseason, but he always shows flashes. And the way that his field goal percentage just cratered last year, his block rate cratered last year. I know there's an opportunity there, especially with Tyson Chandler's injury history, but I just see, Dragan Bender and Marquise Chris standing in the way. And while I don't think those guys are going to be necessarily good as rookies, there's just a lot of mouths to feed. And I think Len is perpetually disappointed. So despite the opportunity, I'm not that excited about him.
Alex Len as a whole is this. That's my hand going up and down, because that's what you should be expecting from him throughout the year. I mean, he has the potential to be something. I mean, you look at him, he's long, he can run up the floor very well. He likes to put his back to the basket. He has a nice hook shot. He has a nice mid-range, but he seems his game is always inconsistent. Tyson Chandler is still there, being that veteran presence on the floor for that team, and has shown that when he's engaged and he's playing with a healthy roster, the things that Tyson Chandler can do, I think, is still undervalued, not necessarily from a fantasy perspective, but more of a reality perspective because of what he can do. So Alex Len is still going to be one of those guys that I'm looking at and saying, okay, he's consistent. You definitely want to have him on your roster, but I can also see him being more of a guy that you're adding and dropping constantly throughout the season. So that's my thoughts on Alex Len. I'm not that high on him. He has the potential if, a guy like Tyson Chandler goes down, they have to start him. He's so inconsistent that it worries me. I want to see consistency from Alex Len. And like you said, you've only seen spots throughout this preseason of what he can do. You've never seen a consistent Alex Len throughout an entire season. And that's why you're going to have your reservations when picking him as it was one of your big men. As we move on to the next question here, it says, on Jeremy Lin, where would you take him this year?
I like Lin quite a bit this year. I've said it before. I think he's kind of the only show in town when it comes to ball handlers in Brooklyn. I think if you're in a 9-cat league, he takes a hit. I think the turnovers aren't going to be great, but in general, I think he's going to get you really solid numbers in points and assists. I think the threes, while not spectacular, are going to be solid. He's going to be one of those popcorn point guards, but he's coming at enough of a discount that I'm buying this year.
Sorry, I'm reading the chat questions here as we're continuously going down and reading a lot of the questions that come in. So with Jeremy Lin, he's definitely going to be getting starters minutes. He's going to be, giving all the minutes that he can handle out in Brooklyn. You can look at him and know that he's going to be scoring points. He'll get you the 5, maybe 6 assists a game, and that not much else. He's not much of a defensive player. He'll maybe knock down a couple threes. I think you'll see his field goal percentage go up and down a little bit throughout the season. So I call him a late middle round guy. Maybe the late rounds of your draft, you want to go pick him up, but I wouldn't reach too far for a guy like Jeremy Lin because I think you know what you're going to get. You saw Linsanity as a starter. You know what he was as a off the bench guy for Charlotte last year. Points in a hurry, but at the same time can hurt you in field goal percentage and in other categories when the defensive pressure is there. So that's my thoughts on Jeremy Lin. As we move on to the next question, it says, let's talk Detroit basket. G. Jackson, Ish Smith competing for minutes. KCP potential. Breakout played amazing today. How do Tobias and Marcus mix together? Drummond much the same as last year? So there's a lot going on over there in Detroit. Reggie Jackson, Ish Smith, don't really like them as point guards as much. I think gets a little bit overhyped. I know that Dan and I talk about him a lot on Fantasy NBA today. KCP, I think he has the potential if he can get more steals. I think the hype around him is that he's a good defender, but the stats don't really show it in fantasy. So if he can get you a Trevor Ariza type, maybe a steal and a half or so, a strong fantasy asset for your team, kind of like a Trevor Ariza because he can shoot the 3-point shot. But as of right now, he's kind of where like, okay, if you're not going to give me the steals, you're more of a late round guy. Marcus Smart, the twin brother, Morris, and Tobias Harris mixed together. I think of the two, I like Tobias Harris. What are your thoughts on those two?
Yeah, I like Harris more. I think he gives you just a bit more versatility when it comes to his ability to score the ball. I also think that he's earned some trust from Van Gundy, and with players that are so similar, just whoever's going to see a bit more of a nod is worthwhile to me there. The one thing I'll say about KCP is just like, I think in a lot of drafts, I've been able to draft him as just a late round specialist and hope for more. And if you're sitting in that position, you're great. If you're going much higher, I worry that you price out his upside, just kind of hoping that the steals materialize.
Yeah, that's all it is with a guy like KCP. It's just the steals need to be there. What are your thoughts on Ish Smith and Reggie Jackson? I know Dan and I have kind of gave our thoughts on him, and I think even Aaron earlier last week gave his thoughts on Reggie Jackson. But what are your projected stats for him once he returns this season?
I mean, I think I'm right where you guys are on Reggie Jackson. I don't think he's an above average point guard in real life or in fantasy. So like, great. He gets you 18 points, 6 assists, but the steals aren't going to, he's going to have fewer than a steal a game. He's going to hit maybe a 3.5 if we're being optimistic. Field goal percentage isn't going to be great. I just don't know what he does that's special for your fantasy team, right? People get excited because you can say he's an 18-8 guy, but that really overlooks a lot of his flaws as a fantasy player.
So we're going to take 3 more questions from today's show that we're going to be wrapping up. I want to thank everyone who is watching this hoop-ball.com presentation of Fantasy NBA Tonight live with myself, Vince Miracle, and my new Monday co-host, Jake Cousins. Jake, thanks for joining me on this Monday night. We're having a lot of fun here answering all these questions.
It's been awesome, man.
So we'll move it down here. We'll see what questions that we have. Shout out to David. He said he loves these chat shows, guys. Sitting on a beach in Sydney, enjoying the show. I want to go with you. I want to be in Sydney. I want to be sitting on a beach, drinking some Mai Tais or whatever. That'd be awesome. So, David, thank you for watching while chilling. I'm glad we're entertaining you while the beach ocean just soothes you. So the next question says, is Young in Indy and Clint Capella now as a starter in Houston?
I like the potential of Clint Capella quite a bit. He's going to hurt your free throw percentage, but hopefully he doesn't take too many shots to kill you there. I just think with the shooters that are going to be dotting the floor around him in D'Antoni's system, there's a lot to like as a defensive and rebounding specialist for Capella. As for Thad Young, I like his fit in Indy from a real life perspective. I don't think it changes much from what we saw last year. So, he can get you his 15 points and the handful of boards and some steals, but I'm not super excited about Young. I just don't think his fantasy trajectory is that altered by moving to Indiana.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Thaddeus Young. I think I think you'll see those nights where he'll get you the 15 points, 8 rebounds, maybe 9 rebounds a game, and then the hockey assist with maybe the steal or 2. I'm not a huge fan of Thaddeus Young as a huge fantasy asset, and that's my own feel. He's hurt me so many times because of his free throw percentage and the inconsistency in his game. Plus, you see guys like Miles Turner there, and Paul George is a good rebounder. Jeff Teague is a decent rebounder. So there's guys there that can actually grab the boards and take rebounds away from a guy like Thaddeus Young, which is one of the biggest things that helps his fantasy value. So on Clint Capella, you're punting free throws. I mean, if that's already the mindset of what you're doing and you're punting free throws, that's what you can expect from him. But he can run the floor. I mean, I think of all the big men that were on that team that could fit D'Antoni's system, I think Clint Capella actually meets the call because he plays defense and he can roll to the basket and jump it and athletically dunk the ball down. So as long as you know that you're punting free throw percentage, Capella's an okay pick. Next question here, and it says, would you trade Victor Oladipo for John Wall straight up? I'll let that happen for you.
I've spent the whole show trumpeting Oladipo as a late second round pick. But no, I know that the knee surgeries are a concern with Wall, but he's looked explosive so far in preseason action. This is his team, and when he's right, he's a top 10 guy, and Oladipo certainly hasn't proven that. I'm about as aggressive on Oladipo as anyone I know, and I'm not cashing in for Wall. No.
I'm saying, so would you, if someone offered you John Wall and you have Victor Oladipo, do you hit accept on that trade?
Oh yeah, for sure. I'd much rather have Wall. He's proven it, right? Victor Oladipo's best case scenario is a healthy John Wall.
John Wall has shown that he lives in that early second round value. He lives there. That's exactly where he needs to be drafted. And I know the knees are something that are worrying people, but they're starting to ramp up his minutes slowly but surely while they get closer to the regular season. And I mean, in 14 minutes, or I believe it was maybe even less than that, maybe it was 12 minutes, the guy finished with 9 points and 9 assists. He's getting double doubles whenever he really wants to in those two categories. And maybe you're looking at Oladipo and you're like, okay, he may shoot a better efficiency, and he has a better free throw percentage, but you're looking at John Wall. He gets you the steals, he gets you the assists, and he gets you the points. With he's actually not that bad of a rebounder either. So, which one do you want to take? And for me, I think it's going to be what I think, Jake, you'll agree with this as well, is I want someone who has done it before, who has been there, and who's going to show what his value is on a consistent basis. Where Victor Oladipo, well, we know he can do when given the minutes. First time where I feel like he's going to be truly unleashed, because that did not happen in Orlando. So people are hoping that he's going to be that top 20 player, that early to mid second round pick, where John Wall lives there. He's already been there. You know what you're going to get from him. So I would say, yes, I would take John Wall over Victor Oladipo this season, but I also think it depends on what stats you're looking for.
And even if Oladipo breaks out in all the ways that optimists like me are hoping he does, he still has Russell Westbrook on his team. When John Wall's right, he's the whole show in town for Washington. I mean, like, I know Bradley Beal is there, but he's not taking meaningful shots away from John Wall.
We'll take these last two questions here, and that'll actually wrap up our show. So the first question is, Oladipo and Jokic, would you say there's too much risk in taking them second and third? Should I only try to target only one of them?
I like the way you're thinking. I like the idea of making sure that your roster is balanced in terms of like risk assessment as well as stats. I think those are two that I would be comfortable taking second and third. There is some risk there, but we've seen real brilliance from both of them. I think Jokic is going to be a star this year. I think we've seen consistent play from Oladipo when he isn't being tortured by Scott Skiles. So I'm comfortable with that amount of risk. You're right in thinking about it that way, though.
I would take that 100%. If you can get Jokic or Oladipo in the second, and then get Jokic or Oladipo in the third, and you have that option, I think the upside is there. I think that's something that you definitely want to look at. And if you can get, I mean, is it a little risky? Maybe, perhaps a little bit, but again, like we just said, Oladipo, this is going to be the first time you can truly say he's going to be unleashed this season, with no Scott Skiles and him not being in Orlando and them needing another scorer now that Kevin Durant is gone in OKC. And with Jokic, I mean, with this guy, I mean, I think he has the ability to be one of the strongest fantasy assets this year, at least, and potentially, early second round value, I think, is what he has the upside to be. And because he's so versatile as a big man. So I think is there a risk there? Yeah, maybe because they're young and they haven't really shown what they can be as, someone that's truly been unleashed, but that's what a breakout year is. And that's why you want to get him. You want to get him on the year of the risk, but if you can get them in their second and third rounds of your draft, I think that's definitely something that you want to do. And do you want to at least target one of them? Yeah, I would say you want to target one of them. If you had the choice, Jake, who would you want to target? Jokic or Oladipo?
I'm gonna cop out a little bit here and say that it's format dependent. I think in a dynasty league or in a 9-cat league, I'm going Jokic. I think if it's an 8-cat league and it's just for this year, I'll take Oladipo just because I think his minutes are a little bit safer.
All right, so we'll take this last question here, and it says, Hayward will be back. I was offered him for DeAndre, but I don't want to sit on a guy for a month. 12-team, 9-cat head-to-head league.
I mean, unless you've already built your team to punt free throws around DeAndre, I'd rather have Hayward for the season. His initial timetable was 4 to 6 weeks, if I'm not mistaken. So, I mean, you're going to be sitting on him for the first 10 to 15 games of the regular season. If that's really going to frustrate you, maybe he's not for you. But I think that's a worthwhile price to pay to get him when he comes back instead of DeAndre.
Yeah, I mean, I think like Jake said, if you've already made a team that's structured around punting free throw percentage,
yeah,
DeAndre Jordan. And if you don't want to wait on a guy for a month, then yeah, just stay with DeAndre. But free throws, and you just drafted DeAndre Jordan, and you were just offered Gordon Hayward. I mean, I'm okay with waiting the 10 to 15 games. 12-team, 9-cat head-to-head league. I mean, he'll come into play. You guys are getting reaching your playoff point of your season, so I would take that trade. It just depends on how your current team is constructed. So, guys, I want to thank every single one of you for joining us on Fantasy NBA Tonight Live, the Monday edition with my new co-host every single Monday, Jake Cousins. Jake, give the guys your final thoughts and what you'll be doing this week and where they can find you online.
It's been super fun. Thank you, everyone, for showing out. I'll have a daily dish column up tomorrow and an ADP report up probably on Sunday. So watch out for those on hoop-ball.com. And you can find me on Twitter at Abyss Also Gazes. Thanks, everybody.
At Abyss Also Gazes, or just type in Jake Cousins and look how that is spelled. I think that's probably be the easiest
Probably
way.
Easier, yeah.
Mondays, guys, you see that polo shirt that he is wearing. Are going to be coming in here with the same exact polo shirt on a Monday, and you guys be like, oh, that will be that day. And you know what? Maybe we'll have a promo code on that day, and the promo code will be Twinsies. So look out for that in the future shows. Follow the site, guys, hoop-ball.com, on Twitter at hoopballtweets. Once again, I'll say the site again because you guys need to bookmark this site, hoop-ball.com. We have the draft guide up for sale right now, the premium subscriptions. You guys go check them all out. Follow me on Twitter or on all social media platforms of at VM Center, and we will be seeing you guys tomorrow night. And until then, have a great night and see you on Tuesday.